Well, Wamanjeka, in the words of Woiwurrung, words to say welcome to today's practice forum, Preventing Customer to Colleague Sexual Harassment, presented by Our Watch. Would really like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which I'm on, Wurundjeri country, and all the lands that we come to from across the country today as part of this session. Acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded, and I want to pay my deep respects to elders past and present, and extend that acknowledgement to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us today. We acknowledge too the decades of long work that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have done working to prevent and address violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, and the leadership shown by our First Nations communities. I'm Mike. It's fantastic to be here. I'm wearing a red checkered top and a pair of headphones. Sometimes I'm looking up to the screen that's above me, showing the presentation for today. I acknowledge my privilege and my positionality really as a male, a middle-aged male, middle-class male, a white male, and commit myself to working as an ally in this space for gender equality, and to do all I can to help prevent violence against women in all the settings that we work with at Our Watch. And I'm joined by my boss and colleague, Alisha. I'll hand over to you to introduce yourself as well.
Thanks so much, Mike. Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to see you here today. My name's Alisha Taylor-Jones. I use the pronouns she or they interchangeably. And I would also like to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from Coorabuk, which is on Menang Pilbulman Noongar Budja in Great Southern Western Australia. My role in this is as the Workplace Implementation Lead at Our Watch. I am a white woman wearing a black top today. I have my hair pulled back into a ponytail, and I'm excited to be joining you on this 2-hour session today around preventing customer to colleague sexual harassment. We'll go into a little bit about Our Watch for those of you who may not be familiar with us. Our Watch is a national leader in the primary prevention of violence against women, and we work with a whole range of settings. So we, businesses, governments, our team obviously is around workplaces, so where people engage in work, whether that's NGOs, corporates, or small businesses throughout Australia, with the aim of trying to drive long-term cultural change across all of these settings where people live, work, play, and pray. We'll do a little bit. We've had our introductions. We also have a range of panelists who will be joining us throughout the session today. I think we'll introduce them as they come up to their sessions. But we would like to get to know a little bit about you. Could you write in the chat for us what organisation you are joining us from today, if you're here on behalf of an organisation, and what is important to you? What is your burning question, I guess, around when it comes to preventing customer to colleague sexual harassment? So for context, where we're talking there is when you have colleagues, you have your staff, and they're being impacted by unwanted and undesirable behaviours from clients, customers, external stakeholders. Welcome, Simone. A few representatives from TPG Telecom. Here it comes through. From Christina for getting out today, what employers can do to respond. Fantastic. Sharon from eSafety, interested in hearing examples and where tech has been used to harass or abuse. More TPG Telecom, UniSA, University of New England, interest around prevention strategies in climate customer client space, and UNE, how to make our staff safer from this behaviour. Yeah, I mean, that's the core of it, right? Amy joining us from AMROS. Understanding how prevention can be done at a national and state level. The E-Safety Commission, welcome. How we can empower frontline teams. What can we do more to help respond from the E-Safety? Fantastic. Thanks for the love of the pivot, Chrissy. We've always got to be flexible. Women's health in the Southeast. Thank you. Yeah, so how do we get away from the customer is always right mentality and empower employees to speak up? Mervac, City Council, Respect Victoria, a wonderful range of people joining us here today. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your time with us. A little bit about where you need to go for help if necessary. So I just want to acknowledge that violence against women and sexual harassment is widespread in society, and it touches the lives of many people. So it's normal to have a strong reaction to some of the things we'll be talking about today. If you need a bit of additional support during the session, after the session, Mike and myself are obviously here, happy to talk afterwards if need be, but we do always recommend reaching out to helpful organisations such as 1-800-RESPECT. The numbers are all on the screen. Also the Australian Human Rights Commission National Information Service. The Men's Referral Service, if you identify as a man and it brings, this discussion sort of brings up some concerns about either your own behaviour or other men in your life that you might want to talk through. And finally, 13 Yarn, if you're one of our Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander people joining us today and want a culturally supportive and sensitive place to talk. You can, of course, depending on if you're joining from an organisation, reach out to your respective employee assistance programs. In order to keep this a functioning and sort of thriving space for today, we do go through what's called a group agreement. So this session is an opportunity for everybody to contribute. And while some of the content might be professionally or personally challenging, we find it useful to have this group agreement so that everyone's on the same page. First of all, respectful conversations, great to challenge ideas, but please don't challenge people. Any question or comment is okay, you know, while we're learning. You don't have to have the perfect wording. If there's something you want to ask, please do feel free to put it through in the Zoom chat or raise your hand. We offer a lot of grace around wording and framing in order to actually get your question across. I ask people to practice self-care, so please do what you need to take care of yourself today. We're here together for 2 hours. If you need to stand up, if you need to get a drink of water, if you need to go to the bathroom, if you need to switch off your camera, much as we love seeing everyone's faces and find that much more engaging, please do turn on your camera if you can and leave your microphone muted if you're not speaking. But make sure you do take care of yourself. This is a learning space. We say not a support space, but it is a supportive space. That makes sense. Have a commitment to participate, but a right to pass. You may be invited to offer your insights, your suggestions, your questions. We like to keep this engaging, but obviously feel free to pass if that particular topic or question is not for you. We like to be inclusive. We all have a role to play in keeping this as an inclusive space. As I've said, use the chat box for questions if you like, and make sure you do your bit to encourage other people of all voices speaking today. So we'll try and keep a bit of a balance across the board of people contributing. And if you are going to speak, to come off mic, it would be great if you could introduce yourself using your name and where you're from, just from a bit of context. Confidentiality. We are recording this session today, and whilst we encourage you to share what you learned from the training session today with your colleagues and others, we do ask that you don't share other people's personal stories. Chatham House rules is the general view that we take with this. The recording from today will be offered to participants who signed up for the session today. We ask you to be present, as I said, camera on if you can, and we will do our very best to keep to time within our absolutely packed 2 hours today. Is everyone okay with those group agreements? Can we use the reactions perhaps to send up some thumbs up? Please feel free to jot in the chat. Anything there was challenging? I'm seeing a few thumbs up. Okay. Mike, I'm going to pass to you to outline the session today, please.
It is a jam-packed session, so here's our plan. First of all, very shortly, I'll be handing over to Professor Rae Cooper to learn more about gender disrespect and inequality, specifically in retail work. Then we have a presentation from Carolyn Wilkes from eSafety's Commissioner's Office. We'll then have a chance to contribute to a live case study. We'll have a chance for a couple of volunteers to help brainstorm suggest some solutions to a challenge. And then the final part of our session, we've got a presentation from Zoe Condliffe from She's a Crowd on lessons on dissolving barriers to reporting and a reporting tool that She's a Crowd has. So a really great session, hopefully with lots of practical tools for us. So without further ado, in the interests of keeping us to time, it's my great pleasure and it's our great honor actually to have Professor Rae Cooper join us. Professor Cooper is a gender work and employment relations professor at the University of Sydney Business School and the founding director of the Australian Centre for Gender Equality and Inclusion at Work. She's the leading researcher on the world of work, having researched and published scores of articles across many aspects of women's working lives, including respect and equality at work, career navigation, working life in very predominantly male-dominated sectors, and presently her key projects examine sexual harassment in the retail industry. So we're super excited to hear more about the most recent piece of research that Professor Cooper brings to the world. Over to you.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for that lovely introduction. I noted that you said I was the researcher on the world of work. I'd like to say I am, but I definitely am not. I'm a researcher. So I might have to get you to unshare so I can share. Does that work?
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So great to be here, and thank you so much for having me along, and thank you so much for the work that Our Watch does. I keep up with your seminars and materials and have chats regularly with colleagues in your network. So thank you so much for your leadership and your support. And also hello to everyone who's here. But this has got my name on it because only my name on it because one of my team did it because I'm presenting. But I have to say, I'm not really one to present something to pretend it's all my own work. There's a very big team who worked with me on this project, and mine's only one of the names on the front page of this most excellent report. I've got a QR code that's coming up that you can link you to the report, and I'll also will list the names of the people who worked with me on the project as well. And what else did I want to say? I also, before I even start, I want to say this is an ANROS report, and we were very happy to receive an ANROS grant under the Respect at Work grants that ANROS funded. And I've got to say, the ANROS team were absolutely amazing to work with from the beginning of the project through project management all the way to when we did a press release and a press conference almost 2 weeks ago to get the word out. we just got a media report on the day that we released the report, and it's told us that the audience share was about 14 million people. So that's in large part due to the really great work that the ANROS colleagues did with us. So I wanted to acknowledge that they've been working with us, and their ANROS is on the front page as well as my name and the rest of the team I've worked with. I also wanted to acknowledge country. I'm on Gadigal land, beautiful Gadigal land, and I want to acknowledge elders past and present, and also acknowledge any Aboriginal people who are with us today, and acknowledge continuing custodianship of the land. Okay. All right. So I said to you before that I was going to just note that you could access the report through the that you can get it through that QR code there. I think I'll also pop it in the chat later on, just the link to their ANROS site where you can download the report if you're interested. And also just to note there that my co-authors, I thought I might forget them if I said it on the front page. So it's myself, Professor Liz Hill, Dr. Sneha Cedarhull, Dr. Mariah Foley, Marnie Harris, Charlie Hock, and Amy Tapsell were all very important in writing this report. We all did different bits and pieces of the work. Again, just to acknowledge ANROS and all of the great staff there who helped us all the way through the project. I'll assume everyone who wants to QR code is QR coded. All right, so I'm just going to talk. This is a very big report, and it took us a year to do. And I'm going to try to just narrow it down a little bit from the report, which you can have a look at yourself, and feel free to talk to us if you have any particular questions about the findings, methods, or focus. So I'm just going to really talk through these things, and I wanted to just point out that I'm mostly going to be talking about the focus groups, which are 6 there, and we have a 3-step method, which I'll talk about in a tick, and talk about some of the highlights from those focus groups. I've got to say, highlights is not really the right word, because a lot of it is pretty disturbing stuff and quite depressing, and so they're not really highlights. They're lots of lowlights, really. I don't know that that's the opposite of highlights, but let's just go with that. And then I just wanted to also note that I've got the detailed recommendations from the report are in the back of the slides. I probably won't get to that, Mike, but I thought it might be worth just setting them out in brief there, so that when we share the slides, that people have got them there in a more truncated version than in the report. And then also to note that any of the references that I cite here are in the are on the final 2 pages, so you can access those when the gang sends it around. Okay, so what's the approach that we take? This is a model that my team use across lots of different contexts, looking at how careers are gendered and how the experience of the labour market is gendered. And so we've used this kind of model in different contexts. It probably seems like a really strange thing to do, to say, okay, this is the model that we developed when we were trying to understand the gender dynamics of careers in investment management and try to apply that to retail. But it actually kind of works for us, because it both describes our method, but it also describes, I guess, the theoretical sort of underpinnings of what we're trying to do in the work that we're doing. And I'll just really briefly talk that through. So if you look at the big onion, the outside of the onion, through into the concentric circles there in the middle. What we're trying to say with this model is that we need to understand and centre people, and people are the coloured concentric circles there in the middle of the diagram, which is talking about who this particular groups are that we're talking about, what types of jobs they're working in, and what types of employment arrangements and contracts they're working on. And for us, they seem to be really critical things to understand about the experience of people, of humans in the workplace and in the labour market. So we try to centre them and try to centre the voices in most of the work that we do. So talking to humans and trying to talk about the meanings that they make about the experiences that they're having. We could then go back out to the outside part of the onion there. It's also really important to talk about not just the experience of people, but how it's embedded in different contexts, including institutional context, which includes a range of things such as the regulatory context in which behaviours, experiences are happening, who the big parties are and what their actions are. And for us, that might include, for example, in this particular space, the legislative context in which we're working, and that might include, for example, the new positive duty in relation to sexual harassment. We talk about industry and the ways in which industry has a real impact on what happens to those people and what their experiences are. So I can tell you very much that our analysis of what happens in investment management is really quite different to what happens in the retail sector. And there are really, we talk a lot about social norms as they exist in, broadly in society, particularly around gendered experiences and issues. But we see these kind of expressing themselves in particular ways in different industry contexts. And so what we're trying to capture are some of the norms that are really expressed in specific industry areas. And it won't surprise you to know that the issue of, the customer being king, or the customer is always right, or customer sovereignty really comes out very strongly in retail, as it does in many service sector contexts. Then there's the organisational context as well, and the organisation might include things such as the policies and the practices of particular organisations. It might include which segment of the industry a particular organisation sits within, and that can all shape what's going on in that particular scale that we're looking at. So that model kind of drives the way that we try to think about what drives the experiences of people. And it also is a way to try to situate what we're doing, but it also drives our method to a point. So we sort of have a number of steps to our method that try to capture all of those things. I can't talk about all of them, but that's a start. Okay. Can she move her slides along? Yes. Okay. I'm also trying to move, when you've got the people's faces, I'm trying to move people's faces so I can also see my big words. Okay, so basically we have a three-phase approach in this work, and that's all detailed in the report. The first step was analysis of 4 big data sets. The second was interviews with key informants, and the third was targeted focus groups. I'm going to spend most of my time on 3. So the data sets that we looked at were the Human Rights Commission's Time for Respect report and their data, the collaborative piece that was done between the SDA, the Retail Union, and the Human Rights Commission in 2019. And then 3 and 4 are 2 surveys that were done by our team at the University of Sydney that include either a sample of retail workers, and you'll see if there's 2 numbers in a bracketed in brackets against one of those. The second number is retail workers, and the bigger number will be the total sample. So you can see that 2 of those surveys, number 2 and number 4, have only, number 2 and number 3 have only retail workers in them, but the others have smaller groups of retail workers. So we used all of those to try to go, okay, what's the levels, and what are the hotspots, which is probably not the right word, but where are the particularly risky groups, at-risk groups, or at-risk or risky contexts in which people are working from those data sets. From that, we then sort of formed up interviews with industry key informants, and they tended to be people working in very senior roles in retail. They might have been people who were the person most responsible for dealing with sexual harassment policy in a large retail business. And there might be some of those people here in the audience today, and I wanted to acknowledge the time that they put in to help us to form up our thinking around this particular question. But it also included people from industry associations and also the Retail Union, who gave us some really good sort of high-level context about what's going on, what they see as the key problems, and helped us to try to work out what the focus might be of our questions in our focus groups. So together, 1 and 2 together helped us to come up with some propositions about how we should construct the sample for the focus groups with retail workers and retail managers. In the end, we did 12 online focus groups which had a mix of retail workers and managers. Most of them were not supervisors, but there was a decent share of supervisors. And we had anticipated that would work, having them all mixed together, but we worked out in the end that we wanted to get that voice of supervisors a little bit more foregrounded. So we ran 2 that were just with managers in the end. It was very hard to recruit them because they work really long hours, there weren't a lot of managers that we pulled into those groups, but what they did give us was some really rich and nuanced data. Okay, so all those focus groups were targeted around different employment types. So if you go back to the model, they were sort of informed by those three concentric circles. So about the types of employment contracts people were working in, the type of workplace they were working in, and the groups and the identities of the workers. And we tended to try to get them as tightly as we could to being a common interest group. Now, I'm going to talk mostly about focus groups, as I said, but here's just a little bit of data on incidents. So pulling out, this is all retail data, and you'll notice that the 2022 Human Rights Commission data suggests very similar to the SDA Human Rights Commission's report, that somewhere between 41 and 44% of women working in retail, somewhere between 26 and 29% of men working in retail, and somewhere between 33 and 39% of all workers working in retail had had an experience of sexual harassment in the past 5 years. Our survey, which is the one at the bottom there, the most recent one, suggests a lot lower incidence, but that I can explain that later if anyone's got any questions. That goes to the sample that we have. So it's not that ours shows half the incidence, it's that our sample includes very broadly defined retail workers, including warehousing, including fast food, and including people who work in services to retail. If I cut that by people who are in the ANSCO codes of cashier and sales assistant, they look almost exactly the same as the AHRC and the SDA's data. But the reason why we've had to use this particular data set at the bottom is that that's the only level at which we can get down to unit level, because it's our data, and we were able to do the statistical analysis on that data because we had that access rather than access basically to other people's tables. All right, I'm already getting behind, Mike. Okay, why are we interested in studying retail? So as an industrial relations professor, I've got to say there's been a lot of studies of a lot of industries over time, and I've got to say that retail is not foregrounded in many of those studies. I don't really know why that is, because retail is such an important industry across the global labour market and in Australia. Over 9% of all working Australians are employed in the retail sector, so it's a major employer. It is also a feminised sector, but not highly feminised, if you like it. But the majority of workers who work in the industry are women. If we go down to the some of the smaller ANSCO codes within retail, like cashier and sales assistant, they are much more feminised than the total. We know that women are really important around spending decisions and revenue in the retail industry, and there's been some estimates by the Australian Retailers Association, for example, that 3/4 of spending decisions are made by women. And something that's really important to understand about this workforce is that it's a really young workforce. That about 1/4 of all retail workers are aged in their teens. And if we put together hospitality and retail, that is basically the great majority of first entrants to the labour market. So it's got a very different mix of workers than many other sectors. There's also a very high preponderance of people on insecure contracts. They're very young, and there are a lot of people who are working in their first job. So all of that might actually give you a hint about why people don't study retail as much. And I think it's because it's seen as a low status industry, perhaps. People in my discipline will tend to go after the industries and look at those that they think are probably more interesting, maybe like mining and manufacturing and those kinds of areas. But for me, you know, this is a really important industry and a really vital one to our economy that we need to be looking at. Okay, so I'm going to start talking to you about the findings. These are the key things that came out for us from the key informants, where we did interviews with 15 people who were basically the lead person in a particular organisation dealing with sexual harassment. These are the sorts of concerns that came out, and we particularly focused in on what are the big challenges that they're facing around addressing sexual harassment in the way that they thought would be effective. Often what came out was the age and experience of the workforce, that this is a new entrants workforce, a large segment of it, and that there's a lot of people who haven't been exposed to, and not just not exposed to concepts around sexual harassment, but have not been exposed to the workplace before, leading to lower levels of knowledge of policies. And also, because it's such a high turnover sector, quite some concern amongst this group of specialist managers that training was very hard to make sure that it had good coverage, because there's so much movement. So you could train at commencement and then, you know, basically lose people after that, or that there were big challenges in maintaining repeated training sessions and reinforced training sessions over time. They talked to us a lot about the specific risks in key segments, and this particularly went to looking at issues around the nature of the product being sold. And for us, fashion retail come up as a really big risk area, and particularly some segments of fashion retail in clothing around issues in areas such as selling of intimate apparel, selling of exercise wear, and also in areas such as the selling of cosmetics and jewellery came out amongst this group as being an area where there's really significant concerns. They talked a lot to us about legislative responsibilities and the change to positive duty and what that might mean for them. A lot of them talked to us about this is a feminised. That means I'm almost finished, Mike. I'm in big trouble because I haven't even got to the rest of the.
It's okay. It's okay. Keep working through.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I won't rush too much. I talk too fast as it is. And a lot of them talk to us about the gendered hierarchies in the industry, where, you know, most organisations and industries look like this, with women distributed at the bottom and men at the top. A lot of people would sort of do this when they talked about retail, because it's much more hierarchical, more sort of pin-like than it is like a pyramid. And then a key theme that came out is customers. Customers are a very big problem and a large perpetrator group. And you can see there, I've put in that quote there, that represented basically what everyone in those focus groups told us was about the interactions between particularly very young women and often older men customers. All right. So now I'm going to talk about the focus groups and talking about what retail workers and supervisors told us about their understandings, their experiences of sexual harassment. Something that came out very strongly, and this is a little bit in contrast to what the key informants told us. Key informant interviewees told us that they felt that retail workers didn't understand what sexual harassment was. So one of the first questions that we asked them in these focus groups was, you know, we talk a lot about sexual harassment. Can you just tell us what that means to you? What do you understand about it? And I almost could have had the act sitting in front of me in the way that these people talked about the sort of different types of behaviours, the physicality of some behaviours, the sort of the verbal nature of some behaviours, the vibe, the tone, you know, all of, you know, very, very detailed understanding of sexual harassment. So I think we can't necessarily assume that workers frontline in retail, the problem is their knowledge. I think they know it through having experienced it. Came out very strongly for us that young women were described across all of the focus groups, whether it was men or women, whether it was retail workers only or supervisors, talking about the high risk to young women. And if it wasn't young women talking about it, it was older women describing their previous experiences, or it was other colleagues talking about their observations of their colleagues in the workplace. So the title of our report is Just Another Day in Retail, and that comes straight out of one of the focus group participants' comments on, you know, describing what it is. You know, it's basically another day in retail. Okay. We asked them about, just describe for us, you know, who's the typical person who you would see who undertakes this behaviour, who perpetrates this behaviour. And what came out was, again, a very gendered experience and a very gendered descriptions. And I think it's important, even though we're talking here about customers and what a big challenge that is in retail workplace contexts, that a lot of focus group participants were very keen to tell us that it's not only customers, and it's not only male customers, actually, that some talked about women perpetrating this behaviour as well. A lot of them talked about we can't lose sight of the fact that we have customer perpetrated harassment, but then we also have very strong experiences of peers and supervisors or senior managers as well. And you can see that quote there. it's blokes from all sides, was kind of the way it was described. A lot of reflection on the power imbalance, that more managers in the top, and this creates a bit of an enabler of sexual harassment, but also very, very strong comments on the fact that it is highly gendered and a real age dimension to this as well. Okay, so we talked a lot about what some of the risky situations were and where people had experienced challenges. There's some very worrying and I would say scary experiences and traumatic experiences that were repeated in our focus groups about some of these risky situations. It's either working alone, working with very few colleagues or with no supervision, or at really understaffed times of the day. That might be at close, for example, or it might be at opening times. It could be late at night. It could be in different situations, such as taking out click and collect deliveries out to dark car parks with no supervision for very young women, for example. Intimate apparel, I've already talked about that. There are some areas that are very strongly came out as being risky places. There was a lot of discussion in our focus groups about the ways in which the product, but also the way that the staff and the product were being managed by some of the supervisors that made employees feel that they were being sexualized in their work. So whether that was about, the things that were being sold and the way that that seemed to give customers in particular license to talk in a particular way to staff, or the way that managers sort of made employees act and look in a particular way, deport themselves in a particular way to sexualize them, to build up the connection with staff, and a lot of discussion again about that being a very gendered experience. All of these coloured blocks here are all quotes from our focus groups. I'll let you read those. So what does this mean for staff? We talked a lot about that. We know a lot of people who were victim survivors of sexual harassment talked about how it impacted on their well-being and their safety, about their wanting to go to work and their withdrawal from both work and social life. You can see a quote there from Adeline, who talked about the very profound experience that she had and how it impacted on whether she wanted to actually go to work or whether she could go to work. And the sort of coping mechanisms that people use relate to some of these things: refusing certain types of shifts, moving into teams where they could remove themselves from someone or a group of people who were undertaking this sort of behaviour, moving into areas that were seen as less risky. So cosmetics kept coming up again and again as a problem area, moving to different areas. A lot of young women talked about adopting consciously a more what they call conservative image in terms of haircuts, in terms of makeup, in terms of the fit of clothing. And also a lot of people, and this is something that I think should be a big concern to retail employers, a lot of people talked about the way that they were planning on getting out of retail because they didn't want to put up with any more. This is just another day. There is a very poor understanding of organisational processes among the retail workforce. Sometimes this is about their lack of exposure to understanding, to being told or explained what the processes are. Sometimes it's about conflicting processes that are really in evidence in different retail organisations. For example, we found one policy in our key informant interviews and looking at doing policy analysis, that there were different processes depending on who the perpetrator was. So, for example, if it was a customer, or if it was a peer, or if it was a more senior person, there were different processes that staff had to follow. That they talked about how confusing that was. There's very low levels of confidence in organisational processes and very low levels of trust that the advice that they receive internally would be accurate. And even managers told us about how confused they were about how they fitted in the reporting process. And the same went for people who were peers. I'm racing through this now. Okay. The process of actually getting to reporting and potentially making complaints, because we know that there is a very small minority of people who have the experience of sexual harassment at work actually make complaints. I would say that this will be much lower in retail than it is in many other contexts, and it's because of these reasons. people overwhelmingly were frightened because of what they saw as the real potential of losing shifts or losing their job if they made a complaint. People who did make complaints talked to us about how that had been downplayed or brushed off and not taken seriously. There was a couple of focus groups where people talked about actually making a complaint and quite ineffective and on the spot, what they call band-aid solutions being put in place. And one of, I don't know whether anyone's ever heard of this, but I was quite shocked at this one, where one young woman in a focus group told us that it was customer harassment in particular was such a common experience that the employer in that particular case had set up a cry room, so that where staff went and reported that they'd had some abuse, harassment or something else happen in the workplace, they were told to go and have a cup of tea and a cry in the cry room. Clearly not an effective way to deal with staff in a trauma-informed way to have them have trust that their wellbeing is being looked out for. They also talked about there being lack of clear communication on what the potential outcomes of investigations might be, and a lack of support or any evidence of any trauma-informed approaches in dealing with complaints. Okay, so I might just finish on this, Mike, just so I don't take up all of the time. So, you know, I talked about particular industry norms as something that we try to centre in our work. It came out absolutely clearly that this customer sovereignty or the sort of credo that the customer is always right is absolutely disciplining this behaviour. And in some ways, I would say it's shaping it and it's enabling this behaviour. Poor, bad customer behaviour is quite normalised by all of the stakeholders in retail, despite people being very concerned about it. So I'm not suggesting that people aren't concerned, but it is certainly something that's accepted. Sorry, I have to dance a bit to get my lights back on. Something that's accepted by people across the sector. The narrative is quite fatalistic. This is too hard to control. What could we do? We're better to put, you know, signs outside on the bus stop than it is to do something internally in the workplace. It's social norms. It's broadly, it's something that we can't control. Was absolutely the narrative here. And the managers that themselves in one-on-one conversations and in the targeted focus groups with supervisors and managers talked about how they themselves felt like they were at the mercy of customers and at the mercy of these kind of norms, and they didn't really know what to do. And also a lot of managers talked to us about, especially older women in retail are sort of 35 plus, talked about the enormous amount of labour that they put into trying to head off, identify and to head off harassment of their younger, particularly women staff, and the way that had become really very much a key part of their work, which was unpaid, unrecognised and under-supported by retail organisations. Training, we can come back to that. And then there's when Mike circulates these, we've got all of our findings, and then the recommendations that go against those findings are laid out there. They're basically 10 different findings that you can consult there, and I'm happy to have a conversation about that later. I'm sorry I took up too much time, Mike. Okay, that's it. I'm going to stop.
Never apologise for taking up time, Rae, with such important information and work. Thank you so much. What would be really great is if you could join us on the consultative panel for a case study that's coming up, and potentially that's a great way to channel some of those findings and recommendations into practical examples of what workplaces can do. Because I think that's the biggest question coming from me after hearing you speak is, given all that prevalence and the trickiness of dealing with customer perpetrated harassment, you know, what is it that workplaces can do to get through to those social norms and change the picture, change the story? So rather than open up for questions right now, what we might do is I'll hand to Alisha to introduce our next speaker, and we'll hopefully have more of a chance for discussion shortly.
Mike, and thank you so much, Professor Rae Cooper. I'm still reeling a little bit by the fact that organisations would actually set up a cry room as a response. Yeah, so much to unpack there around workplace culture and responses and prevention. But we will jump on. I'd like to introduce our next presentation is from Carolyn Wilkes from the eSafety Commissioner's Office. Carolyn is manager of the Gender and Tech team at eSafety's Education, Prevention and Inclusion branch. The team works to encourage the prevention of tech-facilitated gender-based violence and building safe, inclusive and gender-equal online spaces. In 10 years prior to joining eSafety, Carolyn worked within the Federal Department of Social Services on a range of policy and program areas, and other roles have been in local government, community development, and in the non-government sector. Yes, I was going to say you share presentations. Thank you so much, Carolyn, for joining us today. I'll hand over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Alisha, and thank you, Alisha and Mike, for inviting us to participate. I've got two other team members are also part of the forum today. So Mike's handling my presentation because I couldn't work out how I could today to share it. But if you go to the next slide, please, Mike, and I'll get started. Yeah. So I'd like to begin by sharing my appreciation and respect for the traditional owners on the country that I'm joining from today, the Ngunnawal and the Ngambri people, and on their unceded lands. First Nations women and children have been disproportionately affected by gender-based violence, and they've also been, particularly First Nations women, at the forefront of working for change. So I'd like to express my thanks for all that they do and to pay my respects to elders of the past for the legacy that they have left, the elders of the present who are leading the way, and the elders of the future. May we help them with the tasks ahead. If you could move to the next slide, please. Thank you. Okay. So for those of you that don't know, and I will try and keep this presentation as quick as I can, eSafety is Australia's national online safety regulator. We're the first of its kind in the world, and we lead, coordinate and advise across government on a range of online safety issues to ensure all Australians have safer and more positive experiences online. So in this presentation, I'll explore what eSafety offers to address tech-facilitated sexual harassment in the workplace, but also talk about what we're yet to do. Again, next slide. So eSafety began as the Children's eSafety Commissioner in 2015 with a focus on dealing with child cyberbullying and illegal and harmful content. In 2017, that remit was expanded to cover all Australians and a range of new schemes. And then in 2022, the Online Safety Act expanded those powers again. So we are a bridge we bridge that inherent power gap between big tech and Australian users, and encouraging platforms and service providers to do more when it comes to protecting people from online harms. We also perform an educative function with our outreach program, webinars, live seminars, and other online resources that are tailored to specific audiences to reach our most at-risk communities and deal with emerging issues. And that's where my team is involved as part of Gender and Tech. The next slide, thanks. So the model that we have rests on three pillars, which we call the 3 Ps. That's prevention through research, education, outreach and training programs, through protection, which is our 4 reporting and investigative schemes, and then through proactive and systemic change, where we push the tech industry to build safety into their products from the ground up. Our approach has evolved over time, not only to keep pace with technology, but also with the ways people use it and misuse it. And I'll skip to the next one. So, oh, no, back one. Prevention. Yeah, that's the one. So this slide, I'll take you through the details of this, but I just was going to give you some more context in that over the last few years, the team that I lead has done a lot of work in domestic and family violence and tech-facilitated abuse associated with that. And also a Women in the Spotlight program, which was particularly focused at the start on high-profile women who were attracting, through no fault of their own, abuse, online abuse and harassment due to their role. What we've been doing over the last year or two, and we're planning to do more of it, is expand our offerings and resources across workplaces more generally to help address gender-based violence in the workplace. So that's just to give you a bit more context, but also to say, particularly in a space like we're talking about today in retail, it's a new space for us. So we'll tell you what we've got, but we're also very open to ideas and discussions today or into the future about what else we could be doing. So just giving you that context. So I'll take you through each of these safe work resources, journalism, etc. So I'll move on to the next slide. So a couple of years ago, our team worked with Safe Work Australia to develop a few fact sheets focused on online safety in the workplace. So there's one for employers and one for employees. So that was done before the Respect at Work reports and the changed legislation. So we're in the process of working with Safe Work Australia to just update those to reflect the new expectations around employers preventing sexual harassment in the workplace. But they are there at the moment and have good information on them about online safety. We also developed with the ABC some resources around supporting journalists and preventing online harassment of journalists. And again, we have fact sheets and information there focused on for journalists themselves and for employers and organisations that employ journalists. Once again, we're looking at reviewing that content. We're in the process of doing that to just make sure it's up to date in terms of legislative requirements and the positive duty on employers. Next one, please, Mike. Okay. As I mentioned before, we've had for a few years now a Women in the Spotlight program that, again, was partly inspired by the experience of our Commissioner, Julian Mann-Grant, who is a target for a lot of online abuse and worse and that got particularly heated over the last few months. But we do have a range of videos and online resources to support women who have an online presence as part of their professional or community role. Move on to the next one. Yeah. A large or a big part of that program is what's called social media self-defense training. And we offer that to as part of our broader training offerings at eSafety. But it's a process that goes, it's a session that takes you through what gender-based violence using technology looks like, some of the examples, ways that women and others targeted by gender-based violence can increase their safety online, but also other issues around resilience and supporting each other. What we've increasingly developed is strategies like on this slide, where we're encouraging workplaces and employers to think more about how they can improve the safety of their employees and users of their services. Though anyone wanting to access social media self-defense training can just reach out to our outreach at esafety.gov.au and make an inquiry about having a virtual training session on social media self-defense. Next slide. It's just a slide giving you an example of the audiences for social media self-defense in just this year alone. In the past, there have also been small business owners, just trying to think, we've got sports in there, local government. It doesn't matter who it is. We are able to provide those social media self-defense sessions, and the training team work hard to make sure that the content of that session is very relevant to the particular audience. So again, you can reach out to get those sessions organised. And the next one. To supplement that training, we do have a video library to explain how to use different online systems and apps just to help protect your safety online, security, and privacy, etc. And yeah, that's fine. As I said before, we have done a lot of work since 2015, I believe, in tech-based domestic and family violence work. A large amount of that has been focused on frontline workers, such as domestic and family violence specialists, police, health workers, etc. Anybody who is likely to be helping someone who's a victim of tech-facilitated abuse in domestic and family and sexual violence situations. So we have guides and toolkits on our websites, information about counselling services, etc. We also have training available. I might be jumping ahead there, for frontline workers. Yes. The other part of the work, as I said back with one of our pillars, is protection through our regulatory schemes. So we have 4 reporting schemes or complaint schemes: child cyberbullying for under 18s, adult cyber abuse, which is to look at serious online harms, image-based abuse, and the illegal and restricted content. So that latter one relates to videos and content relating to terrorism, child sex abuse, severe violence online, etc., and was the subject of recent legal cases with X. The next slide, please. So reporting to eSafety for any of those schemes, the ones most likely for you to come across in work-related situations are the adult cyber abuse or the image-based abuse schemes. There is quite a lot of information on our website about which form and what is covered under which scheme. So if you're interested, please have an explore there. There's some information there about how you report to the eSafety website and how that process happens. But just in the interest of time, I will move along. And the thing that we also wanted to talk to you about is that proactive and systemic change through safety by design. So safety by design is an initiative developed a number of years ago. It's very strongly advocated for by our commissioner. And basically it's about designing right from the start to take into account the risks to groups such as women, culturally diverse, LGBTQI+, people that are more likely to be targets of online abuse and harassment, but making sure that the safety by design approach is taken so those things are anticipated and designed for rather than responding after the fact. So this is something that has been mostly focused on tech companies, startups, etc. when they're designing technology, but we're trying to encourage it as a more general approach so that for organizations that use any tech in their systems, which is pretty much any tech, and it includes messaging mechanisms within workplaces, thinking about how they can screen out, design out opportunities for sexual harassment within the workplace is one of the things that we're trying to encourage. We recently had a roundtable that was releasing research in this space of sexual harassment using technology, and one of the key recommendations was the use of safety by design as an approach. Next slide, please, Mike. The Safety by Design initiative includes a number of toolkits and assessment tools that are available on our website. They provide tailored reports when you go through those toolkits. Again, it was designed for tech companies, but we believe it has a lot more application for use in workplaces and using systems. And the next slide. Some of the examples of where safety by design has been effectively used, or there's been the financial services in Australia have been good in this space with NAB and Commonwealth, responding to an awareness that abusers were sending abusive and threatening messages to former partners through micropayments. So they could put, as little as 1 or 5 cents through a transaction, but use the information, the ability to put information in that transaction to send through abusive or threatening messages. So the banks have developed AI and other systems that identify those messages coming through. But beyond that, they've also developed policies so that people can lose their accounts, have their accounts closed if they're found to be using these systems to abuse and harass. So safety by design, in some ways after the fact. What we'd like to see is more of the designing being anticipated. A lot of that could be improved by having a more diverse range of people involved in the design of these systems. We suspect if we have more diversity and inclusion within those organisations, we're likely to get some better results. Apple and Google smartphones, are now enabled to detect and alert their owners if an unknown Apple AirTag. I discovered that myself recently when borrowing my sister-in-law's car, and she had an Apple AirTag on the key ring, so my phone kept telling me that there was an unknown AirTag nearby. It's a first-hand experience. So they're just a couple of examples of it in practice. So look, I've whizzed through that in the interest of providing some catch up on time, but also some opportunity for any questions or suggestions. As I said, the space that we're here to discuss today is one that is new for us as a team. We're trying to expand our remit and what we can get involved in and how we can help. So happy to field any questions either now or later. But also I did have my email up on there, I meant to say, and happy for people to reach out if they've got questions or suggestions as well.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Carolyn. That was fantastic. I did put in the chat a mention that some of the content you were saying there was really relevant to workplaces with contact centres, but I wanted to highlight for the audience some of the work that we've been privy to with very large, an example of a very large retailer that isn't in the tech space, when they looked at sexual harassment, found that 15% of the incidents that were occurring were tech facilitated. They were staff using mobile phones, WhatsApp groups, social media, distributing images, intimate imagery, etc. So it's not just, I guess, tech companies that can put in measures to prevent this sort of thing happening, and we'll find that it is actually occurring in their spaces as well. I do want to, I'm conscious of time, conscious of energy as well. A lot of people have their cameras off, but please take this opportunity to wriggle your fingers, stretch. We're at the halfway, sort of just past the halfway mark. If you do have any questions, please pop them in the chat or feel free to raise your hand and come off mute. Always love hearing other voices in the space. And if you don't have questions now, Carolyn's generously offered her email, and I did put in the chat the outreach@esafety.gov.au email address as well if you're interested in accessing some of those resources and training opportunities in this space going forward. Does anybody have any questions?
I might have a question. It might be a silly question, so I'll put that banner out there so I can be protected if it is. And there's probably more of a discussional item around, just as I've been hearing some of the information today, it just does get me sensing a little bit more around what some organizations might do as well that can help protect this space. So if I think about it, probably not going to articulate this well, but I'll just say it out loud and you can go with me. If I think about some of the organizations that create a uniform, for an instance, and I'm not suggesting that uniform then means something, but some of the uniforms some organizations might present might provoke unwelcome behaviors or things that relate to the kind of topic of, the customer's always right type of thing, or, if you need to get KPIs of behaviors. I guess my question is more about how can organizations better organize some of the way they look at performance or engagement or appear to help negate some of these instances. Is that something that's come up before? I don't know if that's...
By uniform, do you mean, are you talking about physical presentation of staff?
Yes, for the frontline staff, and just, making sure that we're not also having possibly overly, revealing clothing, because that's part of the uniform. We're actually setting up people respectfully. It was just a whole process I had around what does that look like in certain industries that might help prevent. Could be totally left field.
Professor Cooper, I see you've gone off mute. This is in your wheelhouse.
Certainly came up in our study, and you saw a couple of quotes in those slides there. And yeah, I agree, not left field, very mainstream. Not only the wearing, so it's not just that, the traditional way we think of a uniform that everyone has to wear the same thing. It's actually a style of clothing that's often encouraged in a number of, particularly
maybe airline industry. I'm even thinking possibly.
I beg your pardon?
I said possibly even the airline industry was something.
Yeah. Well, I didn't talk to them, but exercise wear clothing shops. You have to wear the clothing, right? And the clothing is all pretty tight or revealing, and a lot of people feel really uncomfortable about that. Lots of workplaces encourage a particular style of makeup and a particular height of shoe. There's a range of things that aren't just, it's not just classically uniform where you think, you've got the LHD sort of logo on your top. It goes to issues around the whole way of looking and being, the length of hair, whether your hair's up or down, or whether you wear pants, and all that kind of stuff that maybe a lot of us assumed had gone away a little bit. It hasn't. Not in retail. So yeah, I think it's a pretty serious issue, and that sort of stuff conflicts for me very much, as does the sort of need to meet sales targets or get that, when you look at, you go to the till and you have to fill out from 0 to 5. I was happy with this interaction with this staff member. Those things kind of contradict in lots of ways. I think the way that we're sending messages that you have a right to be safe.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question, Adam. And I think there's uniforms, there's ways physical spaces are set up as well. Is there an opportunity for a barrier between customers and staff? Are staff able to go somewhere safe if there's an interaction that's unwanted or is getting hairy? I do want to just add in with clothing. I absolutely hear what you're saying there, and I think that employers should be cognizant of not setting their employees up in any way to be presenting in a way that might elicit responses that are unwanted from the get-go, but also not shaming people for, people should be able to wear whatever they want, present sort of whatever they want, and not be treated in some of the behaviours that we're talking about today, just from a fundamental level of respect for another human being.
Yeah. And I think there's a comment there, Chrissy. I'm definitely not suggesting that what you wear would experience or invite that either way. I guess I was just trying to be a bit vulnerable and open up the discussion about just uniform in general.
Thank you for bringing that up, Adam, and thank you for your reply, Rae. I am conscious of time. Mike, I'm going to hand back to you because we have our case study to work through.
Yeah, thanks, Alisha. What is a really great opportunity now is for us to apply some of the wisdom that's in our room to this issue through a live case study. So we're really, really pleased and grateful for this opportunity. In a moment, we've got 3 members of a major telecommunications organisation about to share some of what they're dealing with within their workplace, and we'll have a panel of people to help provide a consultation, and the rest of us can listen in and soak up the wisdom or chat away in the chat and suggest ideas there. So the way it'll work is our three guests will come on screen in a moment and share the particular situation within their workplace, and we'll appoint a panel of people to listen in. That panel of about 5 people can then have a chance for 5 minutes to ask some clarifying questions of our case study. And then the case study organisation will go off on mute and just listen. And our panel members will engage in a discussion and a brainstorm and pooling ideas for some solutions to the problem. And then we'll hear back again from our organisation about the insights that they've gathered through that session. So all up probably takes about 20 to 25 minutes, and it's a quick way of just seeing how we can apply some of what we're learning and pool our collective wisdom today. So I would love it if there are 2 members of our broader participant group who might like to be on our consulting panel. If you're interested in that, just raise your hand function so that our amazing tech support person can spotlight you. And then Carolyn and Ray, it would be wonderful to have you there as well. I might hand over in just a sec then. So I'll put 5 minutes on the clock. You may or may not use it all, but Pia, Lindy, isn't it, and Greer from our organisation to share a little bit about this situation, what your context is, and then our panelists, you'll be offered a chance to just ask some clarifying questions after that. So over to you.
Well, thanks, Mike. Hi, everyone. You might have some more volunteers to join onto the panel once you hear our large problem statement, and we're very, very grateful to be getting the wisdom of the room to support us here. So we work in the telecommunications industry. Look, we have a number of actions in play in relation to our approach to respect at work generally that our watch have been very kindly supporting us with. The issue, though, that we were really keen to get some additional advice on relates to our retail team members. So our retail team members, they make up approximately a third of our workforce, and they predominantly sell mobile devices, related accessories, and mobile plans. So we sort of straddle the telecommunications and technology industry in terms of how we see ourselves. The sort of examples that we wanted to discuss are really a bit of a combination of sexual harassment and sex-based harassment. So when we workshop these matters with our retail team members, what we see is that our female employees disproportionately report that customers often perceive that they're not sufficiently skilled or knowledgeable enough in our products or technologies. And this is really leading to, I think, what we're seeing as 3 generalised actions coming from our customers. So the first one is that, first of all, we see that our customers refuse to deal with our female employees, and then they instead will ask to speak to a manager. They perceive that the female employees perhaps don't know enough about the technologies that they are promoting to the customers. The second one that we see commonly, particularly in more of our outer metropolitan areas, is that the customers feel as though it's okay to approach our female employees under the guise of seeking technical assistance for their phone, only to, when the employees go to support the customers with the issue that they're having, they have the screen open on pornographic content that they're wanting to effectively show the female team members. And the third one is that customers feel that they can be quite overly familiar with our female team members, asking them inappropriate questions about their personal life while the team member is trying to assist them. So the questions that we have are, first of all, how can we sort of empower our female workers to assert themselves in these situations without leading to customers becoming increasingly more disrespectful or aggressive towards our team? The context being that in the economic climate that we're in, we're also seeing corresponding increases in customer aggression generally. And how else can we address these behaviours that our customers are disproportionately holding towards our female workforce? Yes. Happy to answer any questions. So I think the demographics of our workforce are, it's about, in the retail workforce, it's about 57% male, 43% female. We want to increase that. We have a number of programs in play at the moment trying to increase that balance. When we're looking at the management level within retail, that's pretty consistent too. We're still seeing about 58% male, 42% female. We're still obviously trying to increase that as well. Age demographics of retail, our retail team members they're generally sort of on average 26 years of age is the average age that we're seeing. But yeah, I think if there's any other questions or context that you'd like, we're happy to provide more insight if you'd like.
Thanks, Pia. This is a great opportunity just to ask any clarifying questions if you're on the panel, or if you'd like to throw one in the chat for the panel to ask. Rae, go for you. Go for it.
That's great information and case study, I think, Pia. I just wanted to ask about the ways in which customer feedback feeds into performance reviews, or does it at all, of your staff? Is there any link to of pay, for example, to sales targets or things like that? If you could just give us a bit of context around it.
So there is a commission program, and sales does feed into that. It's something that we're looking at the moment as well. But there are other factors such as mystery shopper results and things along those lines. But sales is a big factor in terms of the performance-based pay.
A couple of questions came in through the chat as well. So does this occur in a shop front?
Yes, face to face. Yep.
Christina here. Yep.
Hi.
So just a sort of thought bubble is sort of, you've got two parts that you're looking for. One is the empowerment of individual workers, and the other is sort of like a more system response. I'm wondering if it wouldn't be interesting to map that interaction that you're talking about. So sort of like more specifically how it begins, what it looks like, what some of those next responses are. For instance, when the female worker is asked to pass it on to a male worker. But also more interesting, what happens after that request? So sort of like, what is that sort of map of interaction looking like? Is there a request then passed on to a male worker? How is the male worker responding? So I'm just sort of a thought bubble here, is that how to perhaps intervene might emerge if you map the interaction in a bit more detail.
Great, Christina, thank you. And it sounds like that's the beginning of a discussion on the panel. So we'll take that as a kind of a comment for the moment. But again, Amy or Carolyn, if you want to jump in with your questions.
Yeah, mine was about, are there existing posters, information, expectations about customer behaviour that is visible in your retail outlets? Or are there, customer codes of conduct to receive service? Are there any expectations or understandings by your employees about when they can respond, or what behaviour they can and can't accept from customers, was my question.
So we do have signage that we're in the process of installing in all of our stores in relation to respectful behaviours generally that we expect from our customers. And we do have training in relation to de-escalations generally. But that's all well and good. I still think what we're seeing really relates back to Rae's presentation, where there's still that mindset that the customer is always right and I'll try and de-escalate it, and there's a level of behaviour that is still accepted, which we would consider shouldn't be accepted. And we're still looking to what else can we do to empower them more and to feel more confident in terms of what level of permission they feel that they have from the organisation in terms of how they should respond to these issues when they do occur. Lindy Greer, I don't know if there's anything else you'd want to add there.
you want to agree?
No, you go, Lindy. I think there's another question too.
Yeah, I was just going to say that when we do get notification of a severe incident, the organisation does act swiftly, and we do take action to remove customers from the network. So there is visible consequences for actions, but you know that in and of itself can cause customer aggression as well. So it's a very fine balance that we find at the moment between empowerment versus not wanting that aggression that comes out in people.
Amy, do you want to pop your question through?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you for that case study, Pia. I guess my question is winding back a little bit, and I think everyone's touched on it to some degree, but what are the current processes that are in place? So if I were working in a store and a customer were to behave in an inappropriate way, what do I do immediately at the moment?
We do have a de-escalation training materials that everyone goes through. So we have a framework of calm, warn, act, and everyone's trained in it. And it can apply to both any disrespectful behavior. So there's absolutely that. We have duress buttons as well if staff members are feeling like it's getting to a point where there's, it's too much. And we do have, if it's in a centre, there's centre security that come in. If not, we have an external monitoring system. They're on the phone with them straight away, and there's processes that are in place from that end. So, and there's regular updates in terms of training.
Thanks so much. We've got a clearer picture of the conundrum that you're in as an organisation, and now I think is the perfect moment to, for our members of the organisation, you can take your camera off for the moment to just listen in, and I'll hand over the reins to the group to have a discussion without any facilitation. So do allow some space for each other, just to discuss some ideas and concepts and thoughts. It might be that you keep the curious mind open and wonder about the possibilities. Over to you. I'll give you a wind up with a minute to go.
Can I raise one thing? I'm wondering about, so we're often centering this on, and validly so in lots of ways, about the experience of women who are often at the very, I don't know what the word is, the pointy end or whatever, it's not the right word, but you know what I mean, at most risk of harm. But I wonder whether there's something in here about whether we talk to male peers about what's going on and how this is feeling for them, how it impacts on them. Something that came out pretty clearly with our focus groups with the retail workers. We did quite a few with blokes about the way that their observations of what was going on, of whether it was, sort of sexist behaviour or whether it was sexual harassment, that was made for a pretty horrible work environment, and it sort of lowered the tone and made them feel icky. And just wonder whether there's something there to sort of talk about this as a cultural issue that's harmful to everybody and unpleasant for everybody and makes everybody feel dreadful at work. I don't know whether that's just a thought bubble.
Yeah, I'd agree in terms of that, encouraging more active bystander or, positive behaviour there, or e-safety often refers to it as upstanding. I think for me also it speaks to that broader, societal work that needs to be done around expectations of behaviour, which, there's lots of work happening in that space, but we've still yet to see a huge impact, but around what's acceptable behaviour to women. The other, one question I had was with the training, does that cover abuse enacted using technology? I know that's not exactly the situation or the case for the women that have been experiencing this sexual harassment and sex-based harassment in the retail space. And what was the other one I was thinking of? Oh, and I suppose, you know, it speaks to a role for e-safety in promoting, at least in one of those examples that was provided, around, you know, showing intimate images, you know, expectations around those sorts of experiences. Not quite image-based abuse, but just promoting more around what's okay and what's not okay, and when it becomes illegal and actionable.
You're on mute, Christina.
Christina. Yeah.
Sorry, you know, when I was asking the question about that thought bubble about sort of mapping interaction, what made me think of that, Caroline, was that your presentation around design and designing it in, because it made me really think about what my lay understanding of that process of design, and that it's a different way of approaching a problem and looking for solutions. And, you know, it begins with that sort of, you know, that unpacking of the journey, the prototyping concept. And so I really thank you for that, because it sort of made me think about that sort of different way of how an organisation might approach looking for solution.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to be said as well. I don't know if you can you hear me okay? Yeah. A lot to be said as well for drawing on things like Rae's work, where she and her team have spoken to retail workers. And I think like I can sit here and think of, you know, many different options, but we need to be thinking about what do they feel and what do they think will work, and then how can that be put into structures and systems as well as what we think might work.
I think that's a really good idea, Amy, and that's one of the things that we do, and we did in this project at the end of every focus group, was what my PhD students call Rae's magic wand question, which we asked to everybody, which is, what would you do if you were the CEO of your business? What would you do? And it's pretty amazing, some of the, you know, really interesting ideas that they come up with. And I would actually think that the centering of workers' voices is pretty important. They'll come up with some interesting things, which
definitely.
Yeah, totally. And even around, I reckon you should maybe talk to them about the de-escalation training too, because I wonder about, I hope I'm not being rude to the team about this, but I wonder whether that sort of centres the responsibility for the action on the person who's having the behaviour happen to them. And I wonder if it's sort of thinking through, and I love Christina's approach of how's it designed and what's the process that happens, and who are the participants. It's sort of saying that the participant is the person who's doing and the person who's receiving, whereas there's a lot of other stakeholders sitting around that and trying to think through, okay, so who's de-escalating? The person's happening to it, was it this person sitting over here? Or, you know what, just thinking about what the process flow is there, even from that terminology. I don't know.
And like in that situation, is it better if you are receiving, like on the receiving end of harassment, to just be able to turn around, walk away, go behind the counter and have someone else de-escalate?
Yes.
Because it is definitely helpful to have like a set of steps to follow, because when you're in a situation like that, your brain isn't necessarily firing on all cylinders. But I wonder whether it's, like you say, Rae, putting the responsibility on someone who is experiencing something traumatic or stressful, or
and the first training might be broader than that. It might be for the team rather than the individual, but that's what I hear when I hear escalation.
But as you say, Amy, the first thing has to be premised really on the safety of the person in that moment. So any sort of strategy can't trump personal safety in the immediate moment.
Yes.
Yep.
This is a super interesting conversation to listen in on. Thank you so much. We could go for another 15 minutes probably, and I feel like we're just starting to uncover the good stuff. But we're going to pause it there, and we'll invite the members of this organisation to come back on screen and share any insights that they've heard so far, or even just their gratitude.
Sure, I'd like to go. So hi, I'm Guri. I'm the General Manager of People Experience, and have just been so grateful for the insights that and the time you've taken to share to help our problem. I think one of the key resolutions that's just light bulbs just gone up in my head is when it was mentioned that the training that we do resolves on the responsibility of the team member to solve for this customer's behaviour. So they may think, if I couldn't de-escalate it, I failed. And that we need to change that paradigm. And I think that's a really great insight that I've taken. It's about that you can only be accountable for so much of what you can do, and the rest does lie with someone who's showing you these images or things like that. So there's a really big bit of work I think we can do around the centres of responsibility. And the other great thing that I think we'll take away is that mapping of the interaction and then making it a team member based response, which we have started working, but I think that's just, for me, solidified that. Pia and Lindy, I don't know if there's anything else that...
I agree, Greer, and I think one of the things I think I would also be keen to ask the panel, if I can sneakily throw in another question, is when we're looking at that collective de-escalation approach, one of the things that we were looking at was kind of like a bit of a safe word type system, so that if you are feeling uncomfortable, you could say that, I don't know, the word kind of, we'd have to work out what that word would be. Is that something that you, the panel would think, have you noticed that being effective in other organisations? And
you might want to ask them whether they already do it. Because I would say they probably do.
Yeah.
If you ask your team members. Are you sure they don't?
Yeah.
Okay. Because I know there's a lot of, in the lingerie shops where I did a lot of work, it's very different context. There's one particular store that's got a code word, which is, can someone bring me the yellow bra, which is code for help, right? And there's different colours of the bra, or, can you just get me that one? I don't have it in that size. Can you bring me that colour? So, yeah, I think that's a really good idea. I mean, it doesn't fix the problem, right? But it alerts people that there's harm happening. Yeah.
Well, what a lucky group of people we are to have had an organisation offer this case study for us, and then to have had the wisdom and the curiosity and the amazing minds of the panel groups. So I'm sure that there is enormous applause erupting in the Zoom land for you. It's never as loud as it should be on Zoom. But thank you so much. We'll move on to our final chapter of today, and I might hand to Alisha to introduce.
Thanks so much, Mike. Thank you to all of our panelists and all of our presenters thus far. I'm conscious we are absolutely going to hit right up at our time, / a couple of minutes over perhaps with the next presentation. So if you are able to stay to the very, very end, we appreciate it. What we have on offer now is a presentation from Dr. Zoe Condliffe from She's a Crowd. Dr. Zoe is a leading advocate on data activism and gender rights, and is recognised for her research at Monash University on digital narratives of sexual violence. Perhaps most importantly to me, she is the founder and CEO of She's a Crowd, where she has developed the world's largest geospatial database for sexual violence, capturing over 120,000 unique stories. Her innovative work has made significant strides in closing the gender data gap and making spaces safer for women and gender diverse people, and positions She's a Crowd as a key player in these efforts. Her contributions to the field have earned numerous accolades, including the Telstra Best of Business Awards National winner in 2022 and a place on the Victorian Honour Roll for Women. Now, because she's so sought after, Zoe is currently in the UK. It is approximately 3 a.m. So she has pre-recorded a presentation for us, and she did offer to perhaps come online, but I'm somewhat hoping that she doesn't and takes a little bit of self-care and actually has some rest. Can I just take a couple of minutes to talk about some of the key points, at least from Zoe's presentation, and perhaps put a link in so we can get some of that context. So Zoe's presentation is primarily around, as she mentioned, reporting for sexual harassment. And importantly, the part I wanted to discuss in this forum around that is anonymised forms of reporting. And we've had discussions with various workplaces about the fact that if you bring on site, I guess, anonymous forms of reporting sexual harassment, it obviously doesn't allow you to funnel that through your typical sort of HR disciplinary actions. It isn't about you having a respondent and an accuser and setting up that sort of dynamic. What it does do, and what is so important, is that it allows you to get almost a heat map across the organisation of what is happening and where it's happening. So if you can lower the bar to reporting in ways that it's anonymous, so that people don't have that big anxiety about, well, what happens if I make this report? What's the backlash or the possible consequences for me? But also, if you make it really simple, and suggestions have been things like being able to scan a QR code and answer a few questions, and that QR code is geotagged, for instance, so you will know in the retail context, this complaint was made at a particular time in a particular store, and the team member was saying that a customer, to draw on the example from earlier, showed me a pornographic image on their phone, or somebody touched me inappropriately, or whatever it is. You can just have some of those criteria there for people to select. What Zoe was talking about is she has, as we mentioned, the largest global sort of geospatial data around anonymised reporting of gender-based violence more broadly. A lot of that's in public spaces. She's done a lot of work with the ride share and nighttime economy organisations, and they are just piloting at the moment a new tool called Radial, which they are looking for organisations to get involved with. So workplaces being able to use this tool to provide that anonymous reporting mechanism. So we will send out the presentation from Zoe after this, but what I wanted to highlight, and perhaps we do have a couple of minutes we could talk about now, is this idea of what reporting mechanisms do you have in your workplace? Do your staff know about them? Are they readily able to access them? And do they know what happens when they do? Because if they don't have a full picture of sort of whole of process around what is going to happen when they click that button or fill out that form or send that email to the whistleblower line or to HR at your organisation, they're going to be very hesitant to actually take that step because they just won't know what the consequences might be. Fiona, you've just mentioned you met with Zoe earlier this week on Radial. Is very impressive. Awesome. Any chance you want to come off mute and talk about a couple of the key highlights from that? And if not, I'll pass to Anu.
Sorry, Alisha, I'm camera off because I'm just out and about, but I've been listening intently. Yeah, I met with Zoe earlier in the week and she's in London, so the time difference was a bit tricky, but I love, they wear a lot of the risk and they capture all of the data in their own system. So they manage all the cybersecurity issues and all of those components. I love the fact that it is a really easy to use, low barrier mechanism in which staff can either raise concerns that they either experience themselves or that they may have witnessed. And one of the things that I loved most about it was that it gives you a really good heat map on what's going on within your organisation beyond, and I don't mean this lightly, just sexual harassment, but it takes a really intersectional approach, so you can start to get a sense on just what are the more generic inappropriate behaviours that are happening across your organisation. So I think she said from memory, they work with you. They're very willing to partner with organisations because this Radial is quite a new program, but they usually set up quarterly reporting, and then they can partner with you on how much support you require. So whether you want them to come in and do a lot of that data analytics for you and provide you with recommendations on how you might address some of the findings, or whether you do all of that yourself. But it's a pretty cool looking program.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming off mute and for joining us while you're out and about, Yona. And of course, Radial isn't the only tool. There are quite a few. If you go online and have a search, there are lots of options. There are things as simple as readapting your whistleblower line if you have one already, or some of your already tried and true internal processes. Anu, you have your hand up. Do you want to? Your camera's off.
Yes, because I'm out and about as well. But I've been fascinated by the conversation we've had. And it's not so much about the tech part of it, but I think what's really struck me is that we need leadership in organizations to reframe that messaging that the customer is always right. And customer sovereignty is the only thing that matters. I think if we don't have that sort of leadership, and maybe if you're a large or a medium scale organizations, if boards are not sending out that same message as well, I think it's very hard for managers or staff to take on that really empowering role. They need their senior executives to tell them that it's not okay. So I really feel leadership messaging is going to be really important in this space. I think the other thing that there was an article that I was reading, and I'll try and find it. One of the things that this particular research found was that middle-level management or managers in store often didn't know what they can do to intervene, whether they had the power, for example, to remove the customer or to deny service. So I think there's going to be a level of sort of capacity building for managers, both middle managers, especially middle managers, and those in store, to sort of get them to understand what their roles are and what they can do to be much more supportive of their employees. So those were sort of the two things that came to my mind just listening to the conversation today.
Oh, we've got a question in the chat as well. I'm not sure. Oh, yeah. Professor Cooper, this might be you around the retail research with ANROS. Is there any sense of why there are both lower rates of customer perpetrators than employee perpetrators, but also lowered incidents of workplace sexual harassment in the non-customer facing aspects of the sectors that brought the rates down to 22%? Would love any insights on this.
Yeah, that's a great question, Alice. Our sample included anyone who sort of fitted into the retail industry broadly, and that might include distribution centres, services to retail, people who work in corporate roles, support roles, and whatnot. So that the lower customer interactions for those groups simply is because they have internal customers, I suppose, less than people walking into a store. So they're more likely to have interactions with staff. I guess the other thing I would say, and Mike and I were talking about this on a call earlier in the week, customer harassment is a really big problem, particularly, as I had said quite a bit, I think, particularly with younger women. However, even for retail working women, we've got to just be very clear that 1/3 of the harassment that was reported in our survey was perpetrated by customers. 1/3 was perpetrated by peers or people at the same level, and 1/3 was by someone more senior than me. So that's a 2/3 internal. 2/3 are your employees in retail. 1/3 is the customers. So I think we need to just be also being careful not to sort of be saying that the thing that is the biggest problem is the thing that the narrative is we can't control directly, even though I don't think that's true. So it's a little bit more complex. But yeah, my sample is a bit different. And what I actually need to do is to write my next report looking at those employees who fall under the ANSCO code of sales assistant, cashier, and other retail staff members, which I'm going to do over the next 3 days because I've got a paper to present in the US in 5 days, and then to have a look at what properly have some data there to be able to show that it does reflect that more like 40% for women who are in those customer facing direct service sales roles. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Thanks for that, Professor Cooper. And on that, and this wasn't a an academic research piece, but in our work we've been doing at Our Watch with Engaging Employers in Preventing Sexual Harassment project. One of our partners with a significant retail arm with staff in exactly those roles, that direct customer sales assistant, we found that the rates of sexual harassment were 3 times more likely to come from a customer than from another staff member. So it was quite a stark difference there for that particular demographic that they were experiencing.
Yeah, which is a bit of a problem when the narrative kind of is, yes, but what do you do to control that? You know what I mean? So such a helpless narrative, I find. But yeah, it's a big risk, and it's more pointier in some particular segments. I agree. Yeah.
And on the what you can do about it, I think there is so much that we've gone through today on that, but it includes those things that the wonderful panel sort of presented around our case study, also around systems. I know remuneration has come up here as well. People are on commission, people who are in casualised or more vulnerable roles have additional pressures to put up with behaviours that they really shouldn't have to in a workplace. Whether you can set up physical barriers, whether you can set up scripts and particular procedures for how staff can respond, how staff can call in additional help from their colleagues. I don't think it's helpless. The customer behaviour in itself, individuals is outside of our control, but we can absolutely create barriers and expectations and manage those expectations on what those behaviours should be if we're going to have, the privilege of interacting with staff at your organisation.
Alisha, can I make one more plug?
Name
tags. Please take name tags away from your staff, because that is, as Carolyn was talking about, there's a lot of tech-based sexual harassment, which is not in tech companies, and the name tag is a facilitator of that. And I saw in the chat there was someone great talking about how at Pet Barn a number of staff write their dog's name on their thing, or some made-up name. Can I just put a plug in for that, please? Just, you don't need to have their names, because it takes about 30 seconds for someone to find that person on social media.
Thank you. I think that's a great tip to end on as well. Mike, can we please share just the final couple of slides to take us out today? So just reiterating again, so we're finishing up with our presentations today. Thank you so much to all of the people who presented, contributed, added in the chat, came off mute and spoke. It was a really rich discussion, and really privileged to be a part of it. If it has brought up anything for you, we did cover, some incidents that might have touched on something that was sensitive for you personally. Please do reach out to any of the services listed here, or your employee assistance program, if that's more appropriate for you.
And similarly, Carolyn has also put a link in the chat if you wanted to report anything to eSafety Commissioner as well.
Beautiful. We do have an evaluation. I know everyone goes, evaluations, but we really do want to look at spirit of continuous improvement. How can we make these type of sessions the most valuable use of your time? How can we actually make sure that we're getting the type of information out into the world that you need to be able to lead prevention of gender-based harm in your organisations? So if you could please scan the QR code to complete an evaluation, or I have put the direct link in the chat and I will grab it again. We would really appreciate your feedback. Finally, we do have another practice forum that will be coming up. It's to be confirmed time, should be early September at this stage, looking at preventing sexual harassment of younger employees. I know Professor Cooper's research has certainly pointed to young women in particular being vulnerable in this space. We know that there are unique challenges for young people, particularly in that 15 to 17-year-old category, who are in their first jobs and usually in very public-facing roles, as well as lower paid highly hierarchical organizations, etc. So we're going to unpack a lot of that in a couple of months, and everyone who was invited to this session will be invited to that one. And finally, for our engaging employers in preventing sexual harassment partners, we will be doing a reflection session, which we hope to gather a bunch of success stories and cautionary tales that we can then share more broadly with you all on taking this work forward. No worries, Lauren. Thank you so much to everyone joining us today. Thank you to my co-presenter, Mike.
Thank you to you.
We hope you have a wonderful afternoon.